Hi everyone, welcome to Cbor working group. We're gonna start the meeting. Hopefully a couple more people will join. First, please note well, IETF processes and policies apply. If you haven't seen this before, take a moment to read this through. As a reminder, minutes are taken, this meeting is recorded and the presence is logged. Thank you, Christian, for taking minutes, and I will be monitoring the chopper. This is our agenda for today. First, I'm quickly gonna go through the status of the working group. Then Capstan will take on and talk about the CDL.2, CDL2, and then we will move on to the Cbor base. And we have a lot of time on the Cbor base. So, any agenda bashing for today? We don't have, okay, yeah.
We may need more than 10 minutes for the CBA2.
Okay.
So 2050 and 1060.
Sure. We'll do that. Okay, so status update. We've had 4 interims since IETF 104. At the link you can find the minutes and the recording where available. Since last IETF, CDL was published as RFC 8610, so good job everyone. Yeah. The charter is being updated. We have worked on that during interims and we have sent a version to the ISG. You can see that in the main list. Cbor this has a new version that was submitted in July, so for this deadline submission deadline. And today we will talk about the issues that are left. The Cbor array tag document, the reviews from the working group level have been addressed, and it's in Shepherd review. And finally, the Cbor OITS document has not been progressed. So these were the documents that are currently in the charter. And I think we can move on to the CDL part.
Sure. Yeah, so CBA has been published, and between the two main specs that this working group is responsible for, CDDL is much younger and much more dynamic, because you can do a lot more in the language than you can do in a presentation scheme. And yeah, so we're done. But then in Germany we have this saying, Nachspiel is Vorspiel. So if you think about football matches, if you have done a football match, you start focusing on the next one. And that's probably the way we will run CBDL for a while until it's really good as a specification language. It's good already, but until it's really good. So we have talked about this before in a kind of non-committal way. For instance, this is a slide from IETF 103, where we essentially were done from a technical point of view with the spec, and we needed 2 more IETFs to finally get it published. And to collect items that had been coming up and that couldn't go into the first version of the spec, I set up this freezer document that unfortunately I let expire a while ago and just have recently revived. And of course, the idea is we can now open the freezer and take a few things out and thaw them, but we probably don't want to bite off everything at the same point in time. So the important thing right now is to define priorities, and then the various authors of ideas in this space can go off and decide to work urgently on something, or maybe to put it on the back burner. So that's the situation. And I want to start from this freezer document. I'm sure that there are other things that people want to do with CDL that I haven't heard of yet. And we have a mailing list to collect these things. So of course, Henk has a few of those.
Yeah, I have things, but that's not the thing. What I wanted to highlight here is that everything that is coming from the freezer will be added on, latches on to the existing CDDL. There will not be a fundamental change by them to existing CDDL notation syntax, how it works. So everything that anyone has written in the past 5 years will never be ever compromised by this, will ever be golden, will ever be useful, and will never be not functioning anymore due to this freezer items.
Mental note, add a slide. The work that people have been putting into writing CDL specifications is precious, and we don't want to endanger that in any way. So forward compatibility is really important here. But this doesn't mean that we cannot add things. So that CDL has a few extension points that can be exercised at any point in time. So you don't actually have to change CDDL, update CDDL. You just have to register something. And this working group could decide that it wants to exercise that. And things that have been coming up are, for instance, having other regular expression schemes. I don't know if you're aware that the young people have this little struggle with the open something people. There are so many open thing organizations that I forget what the name was, where Yang actually prescribes W3C regex like CDDL does, taking Yang as a example. But the open something people want to use PCIe. No, they want to use POSIX, excuse me, which is really weird. If you know what regular expressions, you wouldn't do that, but they do want to do that. Yeah, that's a problem, and we have occasionally run into that, but haven't heard a lot of pressure that we have to have other regex types there. The .bits control is little endian right now, and a big endian one can be defined. That's a little bit harder because to start at the left end of something, you have to know how big it is, while to start on the right end, you always start at the same place. So that would require a little bit more work, but it could be done. In particular, since all the box notation we have in RFCs is big endian numbered. And we could also go from single bits to bit fields, and no, where's my bit field example?
It's up there, I think.
Oh, it's not the right order, sorry. Weird. So this is an example for how a bit field control could look like. So this would say in the uint that is called field, that there is 1 bit for flag 1, 4 bit for values, and 1 bit for flag 2, and the values are called A, B, C, and D. So this could be the way this could be done. I'm not proposing this right now, just as an idea how this could be used. And since people are increasingly using CDL to describe things that carry around new stuff together with old stuff that happens to be in some binary form, that's probably a useful thing to have. But I should also mention that in the Think2Think research group, that there's a really big proposal from Ivailo on doing binary bit string stuff in Yang, and we probably want to look at that before we commit to anything here. Okay, so these things can be done without changing the language. They just add to it in a well-defined extension point. And one other thing we can do without changing the language is defining alternative representations. So in particular, people from the JSON world like to have specification languages that are JSON. So this slide here contains the JSON representation of CDDL in CDDL. Yeah, it's nice that it fits on one slide. You still can read it. So of course, this needs to be properly vetted and so on. It's just what I typed together at the hackathon. We could simply go ahead and write a document, probably informational, that just says this is another format, and use that when you derive the abstract syntax tree of a CDDL specification, so that all tools that work in this way interoperate. So this is something we could pick up once our charter allows us to do that. So this is just an example. This is the CDDL spec, and this is the AST in JSON form that results from that. So there is one rule here, another rule, and a third rule. All three are equals rules. And when you have specific things, these are properly tagged in JSON. So this is a name, and this is a repetition, and this is a member, and this is actually a text literal. So this is the way it works. It's all pretty trivial, but still you can. There are many ways of doing it, and we probably should have one well-defined one. So these are things we can do outside changing the language, or we could, we can go ahead and actually put new things in the language. The cuts feature we use for reducing the overall set of choices. That currently only works for map keys. And we could extend that, for instance, by adding whole map members or making it a more general feature. So that's something we could work on. Computed literals have been mentioned by people who are working on specs that have a large number of constants, and these constants are grouped into some structure, like there is a base of 400, and you want to go from there. We could also provide a way to have a Jota kind of construction where the number automatically advances. There are several ideas what you can do there. there could be a better way to have literals for specific tags. So right now, if you want to put a POSIX time in a CDDL specification, you have to put the number. That's not very readable unless you live in POSIX times, and this would be a way to put this in a different form. Regular expression literals have been suggested. I don't think that's very urgent, but it could be done. And finally, one thing that's mentioned by people who have a lot of text strings in their specifications, we could provide a way to embed ABNF. So you are not stuck with regular expressions. You can use the full power of ABNF to describe your text. Larger projects, more work. We could attack co-occurrence constraints. So here's an example for something. Let's say a CDL specification has two data items somewhere, and one is an unsigned integer, and another one also is an unsigned integer, and there is a constraint that this other unsigned integer needs to be less than this unsigned integer. And right now, there is no way to do that. One specification, part of the specification cannot refer to another part of the specification, and we would need a pointer or selector construct to do this. So Yang uses something called XPath for that. Yeah, that depends on how far along in the validation game you want to go in the CDL spec. So far, most people have been able to do without that, but sometimes it's just nice to be able to write it down. Another larger project is going into modules. As we get more and more CDL specs that work together to create larger things, it would be nice to have a module superstructure, have some namespacing, have something like import and export statements, maybe relating to the URIs we are seeing on the RDF side of things, and also possibly some form of versioning. So this is a significant design effort. There are many ways of doing this, and we want to talk, for instance, with the Yang people, how they did it, and try to get it right. A related issue is that of variants. There are lots of specs that define essentially the same structure for JSON and Cbor documents, but there are small details that differ between the JSON and the Cbor document. So where the Cbor document has a byte string, the JSON document has a base 64 encoded text form of a byte string. And it would be nice to be able to write one specification that addresses both variants. But there are also variants that come from a user point of view. So maybe there are two variants of a specification based on some other characteristic than just Cbor versus JSON. So these are all things that you can put on top of JSON. So if you think about the C language that has the C preprocessor, so we could do something like that. So in the end, it just pushes out a CDL 1.0 file, or we could say, no, this needs to be part of the language, so we can actually refer to it within. So both are possible, both have their advantage, and we need to decide between them. Finally, most schema languages have a post-validation instance mechanism. So the validation not only finds out whether the input is fine, but also adds information to the input, which makes it easier to process. So typically, this includes the names of types that have been used in the validation, but we might go beyond that, for instance, having real default values, adding units and other metadata that you don't want on the wire, but you want to have in your processing. And this can go right into the relationship to semantics and RDF. Yeah, so this needs all to be prioritized. And my proposal would be, in order to juggle this properly, that we install a working group document that is serving as a roadmap, probably starting from the freezer document, but structured in a slightly different way. There is no intent to publish the roadmap as an RFC. Well, maybe sometimes we will want to publish a roadmap RFC, but that's something different. But this document is just a running document, but it is a working group document. So the working group agrees on what's in there and what the priorities are that are documented in there. So my intention would be to take the output from today's meeting and do an update of the freezer document that might be a first version of such a roadmap document. Now, if there's anything you really would like to have, there's a microphone. Oh, we are done. CDI 2.0 is like CDI 1.0. Nobody needs anything of this.
This is Hank to break the awkward silence. So apparently I'm in support of all these items because we have composed them over the last 1.5 years together, and we went all through them. If you don't think that any one of them is vital to your current work, we would still like to hear something like, but this is the very least I need. I mean, I don't even know how to apply this at all. So if we will have this roadmap, there will be a sequence in there. We will just work the items off. So the very least you could maybe input here is not if you need that, but if you find it utterly useless and would strike it from the list, or if you would like to, okay, this seems kind of feasible to me, and push the priority. So we have a sequence there, and maybe that is a minimal input that you could provide to the draft itself. And then we can see if there's also an awkward silence at that point of view. You can just work along and go to all the people that were introducing these requirements that are probably not right now in this room. So, but because they're there, because we were addressed by them, people came to us and said, okay, this would be nice. For example, the base, the constants with the base and the addition plus 4, plus 5, plus 6. Everybody's just migrating all the protocols to constants, and CDDL is going to, oh my God, this is so much higher. So this is a convenience function for me, for example. But also other people had these. And now people are coming to the mic. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for breaking the silence. Lawrence Lundblade. The ability to express Cbor and JSON, I consider that valuable. Yeah, that one there. I'm trying to do that already with the EAT draft in the RATS working group to be able to express claims for both a CWT and a JWT.
Well, that's a different thing.
Oh, is it a different thing? Have I misunderstood?
Well, I think you are talking about the situation where you have one specification that describes both a Cbor variant and a JSON variant. So I just brought up the wrong slide, because this is about representing CDL itself in JSON.
Yeah, that I understood. What was the slide you had previously there?
The variant slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is about a single specification describing both a JSON and a Cbor variant.
Yeah, so that's what I'm interested in. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I think the ability to refer to Cbor definitions from other specs, having some syntax to do that is important. And then Sean Leonard before CDDL1 discussed some about better ways to do cuts and kind of clearer ways that are clearer for authors. And I would be interested in seeing if that can be accomplished in CDDL2. I'm probably not going to have a lot of time to work on it though, so it's interest, not volunteering.
Yeah, we need some people who have a little bit of a language theory background to do this. So may have to recruit people that are a little bit outside the normal IETF round. Now, the other part that you mentioned, Jeffrey, having syntax in environment X for talking about CDDL, of course, is kind of dependent on the environment X. So what environment X do you have in mind for that?
We need to be able to refer to one specification Cbor rule, CDDL rules from another specification. Import, yeah.
For another CDDL specification. Okay, so that's exactly the module structure, import,
Exactly.
export.
Yep, I was saying
Yes.
high
Yes.
priority.
Yes, yes. Okay, we also have the mailing list, so if it doesn't come to mind right now, but you still want to say it, just send a brief message to the mailing list so we know what's important for you. Okay, I think that finishes this segment.
Just a comment. I think this is with chair hat off, but yeah, I don't want to walk all the way over there. About the proposal that you have about keeping this CDDL freezer document updated in the working group as a working group item, I think we need to discuss that because there is danger that this will actually delay things rather than, I think it would be helpful, but it might delay things also. So another option would be to have something like a wiki instead to keep track of this and priorities, etc. Just because updating documents and writing documents takes time.
Well, updating wikis and writing wikis takes time too. The advantage, of course, is that we win 6 weeks per year where we can make changes. Because we always can update our wikis, but we have
yes, but it's
draft
one more
moratorium.
it's one more active document on your table.
Yes, I mean, singling it out as a working group document gives it some status.
Sure, but what I was pointing out is that it just would take time to do these edits and update this document, and I think a wiki is more like dynamic, let's say.
So I was going to just suggest GitHub issues with labels.
Yeah, but that's hard. It's hard to actually create the context between them. So GitHub issues are definitely a good idea, and this roadmap document could point to GitHub issues. But I think there also needs to be a little bit of information about how things fit together. So issues are just standing side by side and don't really tell you which one depends on which one. And
I think it might be good to have like in one place to have all of these, and issues are kind of separated from each other. But again, this is just a note that we might want to discuss that as well.
Yes.
That if we actually adopt this document or such a document.
Okay. Alexei, a couple of comments is, I think you're mostly discussing the format of how this information needs to be preserved.
Yeah.
Don't think we necessarily have to spend time here about, very happy for chairs to make. Yeah, I'm pretty happy actually with chairs making unilateral decision and with consultations with other parties, or if you want, you can discuss on the mailing list. The other thing, the good thing about having something in the working group is slightly more under control of the working group. If people find this document and have comments, have interesting input, they are more likely to come to the working group. That's sort of the positive thing of having the document. I think the other side of your comment was maybe implying that Karsten have lots on his plate.
Yes.
So
It's also the fact that, for example, this document expired and it's still relevant, but it looks like it's expired. While a wiki is more, you know, you upload
Yeah,
it.
there is-
It can be the Cbor working group GitHub wiki. It doesn't,
Okay.
like, it can still be official.
I'm very happy for chairs to make a decision, you know, if if it
And-
stays a document, maybe you want to find another co-editor to help out.
That can be also.
Jeffrey Yaskin, this is more about the list of possible new features than the roadmap. Some of the more complex features make me nervous. It seems like there's a lot of kind of speculative, like maybe we could do something here and it would be easy to get it wrong. And I suspect that we should try to keep it simple and make sure that everything new comes with solid use cases, rather like with discussing some of the array tags. Some of them came from someone thought they could use it for this, and then when we looked at the use cases, it didn't look like it actually panned out. And so we should make sure not to do that for CDDL extensions.
From the Jabber, Ira McDonald, I much prefer ID roadmap to either wiki or GitHub issues, which I find annoying and tend not to read.
Hi, this is Henk. Hi, Ira. Yeah, I intend to to look at new documents, and when they're updated, I track them. But I have to also say you can cross-reference GitHub issues. You can change them, of course. But it's a manual process. We have to go through all of them and then find it. So talking about time, I think, is a rather mixed argument. Talking about who is contributing and how is it accessible, I think is more interesting. And as an IETF attendee, I tend to track documents, not wiki pages. So that's why I have a hard time finding site meetings. They are in a wiki. Sorry.
We don't need to spend time on this. I just wanted to,
Yeah.
to have a
Yeah.
notice.
Okay. Good. Yeah, so let's talk about Cbor Vis. All dates on my slides are all fictional. So we have a number of to-dos from last face-to-face meeting that aren't completely done yet. So we decided we wanted to go through the entire document and make sure we properly distinguish the 3 levels of errors we have identified. I think this is about 80% done, but needs a little bit more work. So yeah, there will be some more editorial changes in this space. We have identified strict as a really confusing concept. So if there are any concepts that are worth preserving, we probably want to give them different names, more specific names. So there was something about decoders that check whether a preferred encoding has been used. There was some text that sounded like this gives you some security miracles. It doesn't, so we already toned that down. But there's also another discussion, which is when you have a generic decoder, what part of the validity checking of the Cbor do you actually factor out to this generic encoding, generic decoder? So again, we probably need better terminology here. And if we have something like a require valid mode, it will always be hard to do this for all tags because in 1 hour somebody might register another tag. So there's always an expectation the generic decoder does some of the work for you, but some of the other work needs to be done at the application layer. And talking about application validity in general, only the application knows what kinds of inputs it actually expects. On tag validity, we discussed structural versus semantic validity condition for tags, and last meeting we decided to simply move some tags to a separate document to open them up for semantic validity checking. Yeah, talking to people about that, I noticed this sends a signal like demoting these tags or undermining the stability of the tag part of the ecosystem. So in hindsight, we probably don't want to do that. I think I also think we don't have to do this. We said we wanted to stick with structural tag validity, but we also could mention that validity ultimately is an application concept, and we could make it explicit that a generic decoder could also present tags it considers structurally invalid as such to the application. So this would look very different from a valid tag, but the application could then implement a semantic validity checking if that is desirable.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. How's that going to show up in the specification for that higher level application?
Well, in the specification, you would just say, oh, by the way, tag validity for this tag works this way.
So the higher level specification would say, even though this is invalid according to the definition of the tag, it is valid for this protocol.
Yes.
Jim Sean from the floor. Can you give me an example of something that is structurally invalid that I would potentially apply semantics to make it structurally correct? I can see something returning something that is semantically invalid, but I'm not too sure about structurally invalid, because that kind of says, yeah, I couldn't parse it, but here's my best guess.
No, I'm not talking about not well-formed. For instance, there are some tags that require an array as the contained element. And in basic Cbor, an array is tag number 4. Not tag, type number 4. And now we have these array tags. So an application that actually uses array tags a lot could say, oh, by the way, you can use this tag with array tags as a structural component, even though the original definition of the tag said you only can use classic Cbor arrays. So structurally, you would expect a meta type 4 object, but what you get instead is a tag with a byte string in it. And that's structurally invalid from the point of view of the tag, but it's semantically very much valid.
I have a little bit of a problem with this if you're saying the application is going to do this, because the applications will only be able to, or sorry, the decoder will be able to do this only for things that it has already learned about. It may return things which are structurally invalid and not be able to tag them because it doesn't know that they're structurally invalid.
Yeah, so in a specific interface, you already have to have a way to present a tag you don't know anything about to the application. And essentially, you could use the same interface, unknown tag, to present a tag that you do know, but that is not in the structure that the generic decoder has been expecting. And that would alert the application to, this is not your normal whatever tag, it's a special thing. And just as the application might have special code to work with a new tag, with a tag that was defined after the generic decoder was written, it would also have special code to work with this tag that cannot be conventionally decoded. Yeah, and that all that has to be written up at some point. Yeah. There is another point about tag validity that Peter Oxfeld reminded us of. There are some early tags that essentially don't work properly because their decoding is based on the serialization order. So unless your generic decoder already knows this tag and keeps the serialization order available for processing this tag, you don't have a chance to decode it. Now, some implementations always preserve ordering in maps, usually more per accident, but than intentionally. But if an implementation, if generic decoder does that, then you actually can implement this tag at the application level. But if your decoder does not preserve order in maps, which it is entitled to not do, then you cannot process this. So this is a weird thing, and we probably normally don't want to have that, but it was very expeditious for that particular application at the time. So there probably should be something on the level of a should not here. If you really know what you're doing, yeah, it's not entirely forbidden, but don't do that. We had this one discussion about tag validity, where this came out as slightly odd, that an embedded Cbor tag, where you embed a byte string with Cbor data format into a Cbor data item, that doesn't require anything from the byte string to get tag validity. That tag is valid with any byte string in it, while the embedded MIME thing requires valid MIME, which is probably complicated because you have to read a number of RFCs to find out what that even means. I mean, these RFCs don't define validity. That term isn't even used there. So this is hard. This is easy. We require this. We don't require that. That's weird. And I think what we are missing a little bit is a guidance for defining tags. And we probably also want to look at the validity of tag 24, which is not really defined at the moment. And I think a good validity check that a generic decoder could do is checking the well-formedness. So that may be a bit weird. We are using the well-formedness of the embedded thing as the validity criteria for the thing outside, but it's something that can be easily checked, and that's unambiguous. So that would be my suggestion. I think we discussed this at an interim already. Yeah, I think we had a discussion about map validity. We know that it's a good idea to check this, but not all decoders will be able to do that. So making checking mandatory might be a problem, but we may have another meaning of the term strictness that we can apply. So a decoder can declare itself map validity checking or not map validity checking, and an application developer would know that about the decoder. So these are issues that have dragged on from 104. A new issue that became obvious, the JSON to Cbor conversion, which is not a normative part of the spec, but there is a recommendation that is kind of normatively referenced by other specifications. So we have to be a bit careful about making mistakes here. So generally, this is about turning fish sticks into an aquarium because you simply don't have all the information on the JSON level you would have on the Cbor level. And the main problem is the number system. JSON numbers are not identified as integers or floats. Most programmers are used to a world where integers and floats are very different things. But in JSON, they are the same thing. And so these three things here are all integer numbers. And Cbor, on the other hand, parallels the programmer's world by separating integers and floats. So a JSON to Cbor converter needs to make a decision. And obviously, anything that is not an integer number cannot be an integer number. So that's easy. But for the integer numbers that are expressed in JSON, we have a problem because floating point values, of course, can be larger than the Cbor integer range provides. So not all floats that appear as integer can be converted to a 64-bit integer. Or actually, Cbor has 65-bit integers if you look closely. Yeah, there is one problem there. But then, since most people are actually not doing JSON but IJSON, there the situation is different. Here the assumption is we take the floating point value, stuff it into a binary 64, and then work from there. And in a binary 64, everything that has more than 53 bits is inexact anyway. So you have no way to find out if it's even integer or not, because it's just ambiguous. And so recommendation would be to give two pieces of guidance. People who want to run pure JSON, just take anything that is an integer number according to the theoretical decimal number model underlying JSON and put it as an integer into Cbor, but then you need take 2, 3 to actually do that. So the big num mechanism. And everybody who doesn't care about pure JSON, but cares about IJSON, would put everything into binary 64, like your typical JavaScript JSON decoder does anyway, and then see if the absolute value is less than 2 to the 53, and the thing is integer, then it becomes a Cbor integer, otherwise it stays a floating point value. So the text in 7049 says 32 or 64, and the value would now become 53. But there's only one value, so there's no ambiguity, no weirdness, because different implementations do different things. So number systems are difficult.
Alexei, has the IESG made any sort of statement on IJSON versus JSON? I don't know of
I think
any.
my action focus is now.
I don't know of any, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so I think most people are in this place, but there are people who are using JSON in a different way, and they can benefit from this. There are a few major editorial to-dos, which means I have to go through the document with a big rake and fix things. There is this weird follows terminology we use for tags, for which we need a replacement. I forgot what ticket 85 says, what we are actually going to use, something like encloses, or I don't remember. The current text does not explicitly say that uneven numbers of items in maps are not well-formed, but it does say so, except that you have to read the text carefully to find out. So let's add that as a redundant statement. And there may be other places where this kind of redundant statement is useful. The security considerations need to be finished. This is like 80% done. And we probably want to separate the terms for the abstract data item that we have at the data model level from the encoded data item that we have at the serialization level. So that's another big terminology raking. And there are two minor editorial issues right now, and with that, I think we should be done. Of course, anybody can submit new issues if they want, but this is the issues we have right now. So let me skip over the backup slides here.
So before you move forward, just because it's a bit hard to see from the slides, but you have covered all the GitHub issues in the slides right now. It's just a bit hard to check with the...
Yeah, I won't vouch for that, but that was the intention, yes.
Okay, yeah. So ideally now would be the time to have a conversation, and if there are people who are not happy with the proposals,
Going back to your JSON numbers, you said you need to decide, is that the application needs to decide or the working group needs to decide?
The application needs to decide.
Okay.
Or the generic decoder writer needs to decide it only supports one of those.
I just want to make sure it wasn't something we need
Yeah.
to do.
Okay, so I think the plan should be that we use the time until Singapore to complete this, and to hopefully also go through a working group last call, so we can then in Singapore do the completion and ship this.
I think that just to remind that we have interims scheduled. The next interim, which is 31st of July, is cancelled. So the next interim after this meeting is actually the 14th of August, I think. Yeah, it would be good with an idea of a timeline for an update for covering these remaining issues, if you have one.
Yeah, I think almost all of them can be covered, so people have time to read the -07 before the next interim.
That would be
But there
great.
may be questions coming up, and then
Yeah,
I'd rather
of course,
discuss
of
them
course.
in the interim
Yes.
instead of putting something in the document that then has to be changed again. Okay, anything else on Cbor Biz? So I just would like to remind people that there is some other Cbor housekeeping that we may want to do at some point, in particular after rechartering. So for instance, there's the Cbor sequence document for which there haven't been any technical changes. Yeah, I would like that to go ahead as soon as the working group actually can put this in as a milestone. So just to remind people about that. And then, of course, we can work on Cbor tags. And right now, we have essentially done array. Did anything come up in doing the write-up?
No.
Okay, so I would expect that that will be submitted to the ISG soon. And we have the other documents, OID, for which we are chartered, time for which we are not chartered, template, and so on, that we probably want to work on once we are rechartered. When are we rechartered?
Nearly.
Nearly.
Right, so I've done latest chart update based on text from chairs yesterday. Miria was the last person blocking rechartering, so she has cleared. I think I would like to do a few minor tweaks to the text just to be, but effectively, yeah, it's ready to go.
Okay,
So I'll try to get to it this week. If not, I'll do it next week.
How soon can we pretend that it actually is adopted and start doing work?
You have my permission.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we need to come up with a procedure to handle these little niggly things.
We'll start with the chairs talking on that.
Okay, good. So maybe we can discuss that at the next interim as well. Okay, in which case, I'm done. And I think we're done, right?
Yeah, we're done. So we have 30 more minutes. So if anybody wants to go to the mic, time is now.
Yeah, Carsten, and I just wanted to relay one fun bit of data I got in the last couple of weeks. You all know what the driving license is. It's a piece of paper, or today usually a plastic card. In the future, that will be on your phone, most likely, so you don't have to carry around an extra card. And that driving license might have some Cbor in it.
Lawrence Lundblade. I'm not sure about the sort of IETF procedures here, but I mean, I was interested in having some discussion about strict mode, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Shall I say some things about strict mode? Okay. All right. So this is related to the Cbor BIS issues. It was, I think, was the first or second one Karsten brought up. And this kind of parallels a lot of the comments I made in the GitHub issue, or just reiterates that. So, I was trying to understand strict mode. I mean, it was, when I first came to look at Cbor, that was one of the most confusing things for me to really get my head around and figure out what, and as an implementer of a decoder, I was thinking, well, what do I do here? Or a designer of a protocol, what do I do with strict mode? So anyway, finally, I feel like I'm starting to get my head around it. And one of the conclusions I came to is that, strict mode is portrayed as a, in 7049 as some counterpart to canonical encoding. It was like, if you don't do canonical encoding, then you should do strict mode decoding. It seemed like there was some relationship there, and I was trying to puzzle that out. And partly because there are things, strict mode was trying to address things where there's ambiguity in the decoding, where something could be interpreted more in different ways. So my thinking right now is that there's variability in the encoding in terms of the serialization, and then there's variability in the encoding, particularly with map ordering and duplicates in the map, right? So the variation in serialization is not ambiguous because there are clear rules that say, if you can encode an integer, several different ways, but it's very clear from all those different ways what the value of that integer is. So there is not any variation in interpreting variations in serialization. So we actually don't need to address that in strict mode because it's clear what to do. So to me, that was one of the reasons for strict mode existed. I don't think it needs to exist for that reason. Now, with things like, particularly with the map ordering and map duplicates, that's really a characteristic of valid or invalid. And so we have this notion of valid and invalid to deal with that. So it seems to me like strict mode, I don't really see a reason for strict mode to continue to exist. If we just write some good text about how to deal with valid and invalid, we will have got everything that strict mode was trying to address. So my basic proposal is for strict mode to go away and be replaced by a discussion of valid and invalid. So I
think I did a slide of that.
As you probably noticed, the 7049 is confused about this because it really is trying to address a number of different issues under this ambiguous word strict. So I agree the term strict mode should just go away. We should no longer use it because it doesn't have it currently doesn't have a very clear meaning. So there are two things that are of interest here. One is entities that are looking at Cbor, at decoded Cbor data items, don't always actually decode them. Sometimes they just compare these items in total. For instance, when you're hashing them, that's pretty much what happens when you build a hash sum. And for that, it is useful to have deterministic encoding, what we call canonical, in 7049. And an encoder, a decoder will normally don't have code to check that deterministic encoding was used. And there could be a mode of that decoder in which it does do this check. So you don't accept encoded data items into processing that are violating the canonical encoding requirement of an application. So I think that's a useful feature of a generic decoder. Of course, you can always fake it by simply taking your decoded data item, re-encoding it canonically, and checking with the original. So this is not necessarily a necessary feature of a decoder, but if the decoder does it in one pass and not in three, it might be more efficient. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that performing some validity checks is expensive, so there may be parameters that control these validity checks. And I would expect any code that actually implements tag 37, the MIME, was 37 or 36, the MIME thing, to actually have a switch you can flip whether it actually tries to validate that MIME or not. And among this set of flags, there might be a flag that says, please validate the UTF-8 well-formedness for me. and there might be a flag, please validate the map validity for me. Now, the interesting thing about the map validity which is different from all the other ones, is that a naive implementation of map decoding might lose some input values, and it's not defined which ones, if duplicate map keys occur. So that can be used in certain kinds of attacks. So this is the one place where the application cannot simply do the validation, because by the time it gets the decoded item, it already has lost some information. So this is one place where it's actually important to be able to tell the decoder, don't lose information for me, which normally will mean create an error if the map is not valid. So that's also a form of strict mode, but something very different to be strict about than the other thing. So I would expect that this turns into a number of informative enumeration of flags an application might be able to set in a decoder implementation, and that would include canonical checking and map validity checking at least. But there may be other flags. There are always decisions that a decoder can make that the application may want to influence, so it has an easier life after that. So for instance, my decoder has a flag that uses a different data type for strings that are used as keys in maps than it uses for strings in other places, because that's useful in the platform I'm using. This is definitely not something you would write into the standard, but it's a flag that a decoder would provide for you for your convenience. Is that good way forward?
I think so. I have maybe a comment.
Yes.
So there was a lot there. So one thing about non-preferred non-preferred serialization is if you receive non-preferred serialization, you can unambiguously create preferred serialization.
Yes.
So that, and Jim is shaking his head.
If you deserialize all the way to the data model, you may not be able to actually encode back to the same the same deterministic method, because you've got the question of data model to Cbor type mapping, which pops up in as well.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
I don't agree. Okay. Yes. So, for instance, if you have a language like Lua, which doesn't distinguish between arrays and maps, you will have a hard time recreating the distinction. Many environments can keep all the distinctions, so they do allow you to do round tripping.
Well, I was thinking simple things like if you decode a date to something, you may not actually, when you go back and reformat the date as a string, you may not end up with the same string.
Yes.
Right. So my comment was only on serialization, which is different, right? The thought that a decoder could tell you if you received preferred serialization or not, that's an interesting one. I think there's probably some expense to that in the decoder, because you'd have to track through a number of things, right? So through the layers. Okay. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Jeff?
Jeffrey, what hurts you most about Cbor right now?
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I think the changes so far have been good. I want to go back through the whole thing and check that it is rigorous enough to get through the web standards like processes. But like all of the open issues point out kind of real issues that it's good that you're fixing. And I hope to make time to go through the whole thing again and double check it in the next month or two. So seems good.
If there are no other comments, I think we can close the meeting. We have the blue sheet. If anybody has not signed it, please. Yeah. Thank you for today.